They say that Hollywood friendships can shatter overnight. One day you're sharing drinks at the Brown Derby, swapping stories under the marquee lights. The next, you're slamming trailer doors in each other's faces, never to speak again. Nowhere was this more true than the explosive falling out between Lee Marvin and his co-star Charles Bronson on the set of The Dirty Dozen in 1966. Two of the toughest men in Tinseltown, both legends of the infantry movie genre, found themselves at odds so bitter that Bronson outright refused ever to work with Marvin again. What really happened behind the cameras? Why did two giants of screen combat devolve into sworn enemies? And how did a personal feud nearly derail one of the biggest war films ever made? It all began under the blistering Spanish sun, in a dusty fortress outside Madrid that stood in for Nazi-occupied France. Marvin, already a decorated veteran of World War II, arrived each morning in full battle-hardened swagger, mud-spattered fatigues, a .45 slung low, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. Bronson, quieter and leaner, preferred to keep his distance, poring over his lines in a battered notebook and avoiding the boozy whiskey lunches many of the male stars indulged in. To outsiders, they were a yin and yang of war movie archetypes. Marvin the snarling sergeant itching for action. Bronson the silent assassin measuring every word before he spoke. But behind the polished publicity stills and the director Robert Aldrich's demands for raw authenticity, tension simmered like a live grenade waiting to go off. Cast and crew whispered about Marvin's notorious temper, a man who had once decked a bartender for messing up his martini, who punched a stunt driver for ramming the wrong side of the Jeep. Bronson, with a background in bare-knuckle boxing, was hardly a pushover himself. He'd once fought a drunken fan who invaded his trailer. Neither man was in short supply of fists or feuds, but on the Dirty Dozen, they were supposed to be allies, fighting side by side against the enemy. When the cameras rolled, they delivered electric chemistry, Marvin barking orders as Major Reisman, Bronson delivering a deadly sniper's calm. But off-screen, a single spark was all it took to light a wildfire. That spark ignited during the climactic bridge demolition scene. Aldrich wanted realism. He'd built a scale model of the Nazi walkway and hired military engineers to rig it with charges. Marvin was obsessed with every detail, insisting on prying open the detonator casing himself, hot wires snaking around his fingers. Bronson, still nursing a groggy hangover from the night before, was supposed to fire the Gatling gun from a rusted turret above. But when he climbed into position, he found Marvin blocking his view, grumbling about rookie mistakes, and demanding he reset the camera's angle to catch every burst of machine gun smoke. Bronson, normally unflappable, snapped. "Back off, Lee," he growled. His voice, usually quiet as gravel, had edged into a low roar, louder than any line he'd ever delivered. Marvin turned, white-knuckled on the metal railing, eyes burning. "Touch me again, and you'll need more than bottled water to rinse that soul out of your mouth," he snarled. Crew members froze, cameras rolling but unmanned as the two icons confronted each other like gladiators before the Emperor. Seconds passed. Neither man blinked. Finally, Aldrich's assistant director sprinted in, pulling them apart. The bridge stood half-rigged, charges in place. Yet every engineer on set knew the scene would have to be res-hot, costing precious daylight and adding thousands to the budget. Bronson stormed down the makeshift ramp, boots clanging on the steel girders. Marvin trailed a heartbeat later, cursing after him. Some nearby extras swear they heard Marvin spit. "You're dead meat, you hear me?" Others claim Bronson spat back. "You're just a washed-up drunk playing soldier." Word spread through the unit like an insurgent leaflet. Aldrich yanked them both into his makeshift office, barking orders in a thick New York accent. "You two are the heart of this picture. If you don't start playing nice, I'll recast you both." But reconciliation was out of reach. Marvin, known for loyalty to his own ego, refused to apologize unless Bronson admitted he was riding in the wake of a legend. Bronson, proud and taciturn, refused any admission that he was in the wrong. In the end, Aldrich cooled his heels, shuffled them back onto set, and ordered them to shoot the scene with stand-ins filling the angry silence between takes. After that day, the fracture was permanent. The Dirty Dozen wrapped to record box office returns, garnering praise for its edgy realism and brash performances. In publicity interviews, Marvin and Bronson offered scripted camaraderie, handshakes for the press, mutual praise, and trade papers. But off camera, they refused to share the same stage or extend an olive branch. When promotion tours rolled around, they booked separate flights and dodged each other on talk show circuits. Marvin gossiped with Ernest Borgnine about Bronson's stiff personality. Bronson told producers he never wanted to act next to that wild card. Again, studios took note. Charlton Heston wanted Bronson for the Valachi Papers in 1972, but pulled out when he heard Marvin was attached as a producer. Decades later, Bronson sniffed in an interview that working with Marvin had been like walking through a minefield. Marvin, on his deathbed in 1987, reportedly refused to discuss the feud. When asked about Bronson, he muttered, "Some men don't take orders kindly." So why did Lee Marvin's co-star refuse to work with him again? It wasn't creative differences or salary disputes. It was pride, bruised beyond repair, in two men who measured worth by toughness. Both fought in real wars. Both carried scars seen and unseen. Neither could swallow a moment's weakness or concession. The clash that day on the bridge scene dropped the mask, name-checking, and showed raw human stubbornness. In Hollywood terms, it became the legend of the Dirty Dozen's deadliest fallout. One that cost careers, career-defining roles, and a friendship that might have been a Hollywood legend of its own. Once the Dirty Dozen wrapped filming and cameras stopped rolling on set each night, the tension between Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson didn't vanish into the Spanish dusk. Instead, it shadowed every step they took through publicity tours, insisting on separate hotel wings and never appearing together at billboard signings. The studio scrambled to maintain an illusion of unity, pairing Marvin with other cast members for photo ops and sending Bronson out with assistant directors. Publicists fed reporters neutral quotes and canned smiles, yet whispers followed them everywhere. Can these two ever be in the same room? Will the sequel survive without reconciliation? Industry insiders suspected that this vendetta could sabotage emerging war films that relied on their on-screen chemistry. At screening premieres, fans sat on opposite aisle sides to avoid sitting between the stars, as though fear of their unspoken feud might brew like a live wire spark. Charles Bronson, no stranger to stoicism, found himself replaying that fateful day on the bridge demolition set in private moments. He admitted to friends that the exchange with Marvin haunted him when he woke at 3 a.m., insomnia fueled by frustration and regret. Even his girlfriend noticed a tightening around his jaw, an invisible scowl that never quite melted between takes. Marvin, for his part, spent quiet midday hours in his trailer, unfolding leather-bound journals and rewriting entries as though scripting a different outcome. He drank less whiskey then, preferring tobacco and solitude, as if isolating himself could somehow rewind time to where pride could be swallowed, an apology whispered, and the door to friendship reopened. Producers, worried that word of the schism would eclipse box office buzz, repeatedly tried to broker a truce. They scheduled joint interviews in exotic locations like Cannes and Venice, hoping the glamour might dissolve hostility. A rising studio intern even proposed a private dinner at a back parlor table set with delicate Florentine china, insisting that Italian food, with its ties to Marvin's heritage, might stir brotherly warmth. But at each encounter, at the moment plates touched polished oak, Marvin scanned the room for exit routes, and Bronson murmured scripted pleasantries before slipping away. Attempts at mediation collapsed quietly under the weight of both men's unyielding egos. In the aftermath, both men charted distinct career courses, never looking back. Lee Marvin gravitated toward grittier, mentor-like roles, retired detectives, cynical sheriffs bearing stoic wisdom. Directors cast him in parts that allowed a brooding, grizzled presence to loom over younger co-stars, a subtle reinforcement that Marvin's time at the top demanded reverence. Meanwhile, Charles Bronson leaned into solitary action thrillers where intimacy with co-stars was optional. Films like Death Wish, with Lone Ranger narratives, suited his preference for minimal dialogue and bullet-riddled showcases. Filmmakers sensed that audiences craved Bronson's silent lethality, just as they expected Marvin to dole out wit and wounded heroism with measured baritone. Over the decades, the feud took on mythic proportions. Trade magazines serialized the story as a cautionary tale of pride in Hollywood's golden era, and memoirs peppered with gossip columns codified the split like a classic Greek tragedy. Rumors swirled that Bronson sold a backburner script that mirrored their conflict, while Marvin quietly discouraged young actors from bonding too closely on set. Film schools debated showing classroom clips alongside ethics seminars, asking students, "What would you have done?" The next generation learned to see the consequences not just in missing roles, but in broken friendships that spanned star-studded stages and desert fortress battlegrounds alike. Yet beneath layers of legend and lore, the heart of the feud remains a simple lesson about human fragility. Two men shaped by war and hardship, each with pride sharpened on real battlefields, found that overlapping strengths and stubbornness could create a rift too deep to mend. Their refusal to lower their shields, even when the world begged them to come together, turned a single onset clash into a lifetime sentence of separation. In this way, the story of Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson serves as a mirror. It reflects our own battles over pride, showing us that unchecked ego can turn potential alliances into permanent estrangement. And so it goes, that Hollywood's toughest men became estranged partners, forever bound by the one scene they could never quite share again. In the years that followed, the Marvin-Bronson feud became less of a set piece and more of a living legend. Newspapers printed retrospectives asking industry veterans to recall what really happened on that Spanish bridge. At conventions, panelists debated whether two leading men should be judged by their on-screen chemistry or off-screen animosity. In intimate interviews, stunt coordinators quietly nodded that each man had cut the other a wide berth, preferring to shoot scenes apart rather than risk reigniting old sparks. Yet studios continued to cast both in war epics, just never together. Casting directors whispered that no budget could compensate for the lost camaraderie, nor the distractive buzz that followed whenever the two crossed paths. Lee Marvin grew increasingly aware of how the rift colored his legacy. Directors who might once have written chapters for him in ensemble dramas instead offered him lone wolf roles. Behind closed doors, Marvin admitted to trusted friends that he missed the rapport he'd once shared with Bronson. The playful banter between takes, the mutual respect born of shared military pasts. Some nights, he'd wander the empty soundstage at Universal, cigarette smoke curling toward the rafters, wondering if he could have swallowed his pride, if an apology, rehearsed or heartfelt, might have saved a friendship. At home, he moved gravestones of his most beloved roles. One shelf held a framed snapshot of him and Bronson on set, identical stances, rifles cocked, then a jagged tear across the photo where someone, no one admitted, had ripped the image in two. Meanwhile, Bronson channeled his frustration into building a self-reliant screen persona. He grew more selective, accepting only projects that showcased his steely presence and required minimal on-set interaction. In press junkets, he deflected questions about Marvin with a terse, "We're professionals. Let's talk about the film." Behind his guarded reserve lay a complex mix of regret and validation. He had held his ground against a star whose reputation could eclipse his, and yet, he had sacrificed the chance to forge one of Hollywood's great partnerships. At night, he penned letters to Marvin, drafted, redrafted, and never sent. The pages lay stacked on his desk like monuments to what-ifs. Occasionally, opportunity knocked. In 1975, producer Robert Klaus pitched a crime thriller tailored for Marvin and Bronson, a pair of mismatched detectives whose tension fueled the narrative. Klaus swore it would be the perfect reunion. Marvin agreed initially, texting Bronson, "It's time." Bronson consulted his agent, circled back, then declined. "I'd rather work alone than fight on camera." Marvin clenched his fists. The project collapsed, and Klaus cast fresh faces, actors whose names today few recall. That lost film became part of Hollywood folklore, a never-made sequel that might have healed or hurled them further apart. Yet beneath the public silence, small ripples of rapprochement formed. In the early 80s, at a World War II Veterans Gala in Beverly Hills, they found themselves seated at the same banquet table. The room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists snapped photos, expecting a marquee moment of forgiveness. Instead, Marvin offered a stiff nod as he passed the breadbasket. Bronson responded with a curt, "Good evening." No fists flew. No insults were traded. But as they stood to leave, Bronson hesitated, then extended a hand. Marvin took it for a heartbeat. Cameras caught the shadow of a smile. Then Bronson released the grip, murmured curt thanks, and stepped away. The handshake proved they were both mortal, capable of hesitation, and yet still unwilling to uproot old grievances. Both men aged. Anecdotal whispers suggested they spoke through intermediaries. A mutual acquaintance recalled Marvin once left a bottle of whiskey at Bronson's door, a peace offering. Bronson never opened it. On Marvin's last birthday, Bronson reportedly sent a single orchid, no note. It arrived after Marvin's funeral. For years, fans and critics weighed these gestures as symptomatic of two proud souls, each longing for connection, each shackled by ego and history. In memoirs published posthumously, both left contradictory passages. Marvin lamenting the day I lost a brother, Bronson writing that some wounds run too deep to heal with words. The narrative took on mythic resonance in film archives and classrooms. Film historians cited the feud as a cautionary tale about professional pride, how a momentary clash spiraled into lifelong estrangement. Screenwriting courses analyzed the Dirty Dozen incident as an external conflict echoing internal character arcs. Psychology forums dissected how two veterans, hardened by combat, failed to recognize their own emotional peril. And yet, every analysis returned to a single fact: no artifice, no stage direction, could compel two men to restore what they had broken. Their story endured as proof that not even cinematic magnificence could smother human stubbornness. Years turned decades, yet the Marvin-Bronson feud remained a living artifact of Hollywood's golden era. In the late 1980s, fresh generations of filmmakers began to reference the incident as a mythic tale of pride and professional rivalry. Directors whispered about how that single on-set clash had cast a shadow over ensembles, how studios learned to negotiate star egos more carefully, and how marketing campaigns now often paired photographs of co-stars rehearsing together to dispel any rumors. Meanwhile, Lee Marvin's career arc settled into a dignified decline. He received offers for cameo roles in World War II retrospectives, characters who had seen their share of battles and now narrated them with gravel-toned nostalgia. He accepted a handful of these, each time mustering a wry grin for the camera that hinted at untold stories behind his serenely weathered face. Charles Bronson, on the other hand, carved out a late-career niche that thrived on terse detachment. He appeared in low-budget action films made for international markets, where his name alone guaranteed a level of gritty masculinity. Reviews rarely mentioned Marvin and Bronson together, yet critics pointed out that each man's work seemed designed to fill the void left by the other. Bronson's stoic lone Avengers filled the silver screen with silent menace, while Marvin's mentor-like figures embodied a world-worn wisdom. In a sense, they became two parallel paths of post-war masculinity, each flourishing in its own lane, forever separate yet unwittingly complementary. By the mid-1990s, retrospective docudramas about the Dirty Dozen often recreated that pivotal bridge scene, recasting Marvin and Bronson with younger actors who imitated what they understood to be the original tension. Interviews with surviving crew members resurrected details: the clicking of camera gears as the actors faced off, the sudden hush that fell over the set, and the echo of Marvin's snarled warning. In one popular television special, an anchor looked knowingly into the camera and asked, "What does it take to heal a feud of epic proportions?" The answer, it seemed, eluded even Hollywood insiders. Amid this swirling nostalgia, both men reached points of personal reflection. Marvin, who had settled near his daughter's home in Santa Fe, spent long afternoons walking desert trails, the reddish earth beneath him echoing the smoldering embers of his temper from decades before. He told friends he imagined the bridge scene often, sometimes rewriting the dialogue in his head so that he might finally find the words he'd never said to Bronson. He even left messages on an old landline recording, fragments of apology and regret that he never had the courage to share. These voicemails, discovered in a dusty filing cabinet after his death in 1987, became a poignant footnote in biographies, the last echoes of a warrior too proud to admit vulnerability. Bronson, in his mountain retreat above Malibu, busied himself with carpentry. He built simple wooden benches and donated them to veterans' halls across California, a silent tribute to the brother-in-arms he had lost. He never spoke publicly about Marvin after the initial outrage had faded, but in rare interviews, he spoke of the value of shared sacrifice, of how men who served together found bonds that transcended any argument. Coworkers observed that, in private, Bronson sometimes stared at old promotional stills of the Dirty Dozen, as though searching for a face in the crowd he could no longer recognize. His biographer speculated that building those benches was an unspoken apology, each plank a metaphor for the bridges he had refused to cross in life. The clash of these two titans came to symbolize an era when Hollywood's rough-and-tumble masculinity collided with the era's rising star system. The potent mix of real war memories, on-screen heroism, and off-screen pride fused into a cautionary tale. In film schools, young screenwriters dissected the feud alongside story structure, arguing whether the narrative itself suffered when egos overshadowed ensemble cohesion. Industry panels titled Managing Star Power cited the incident as a case study, how one momentary loss of control could reverberate through decades, altering career trajectories and cultural memories. Then, in 1991, a serendipitous moment briefly flared hope for reconciliation. A long-planned Dirty Dozen television sequel was set to film a cameo scene featuring both Marvin and Bronson, evergreen footage of the squad survivors reuniting at a veterans ceremony. Contracts were signed, scripts were amended, and a small set was built to resemble the old Spanish fortress. Both men arrived on the first day, Marvin hobbling slightly with age, Bronson moving with deliberate slow steps. Technicians adjusted lights, and the director called for action. "Gentlemen, you're back together again." Marvin turned toward Bronson, whose expression remained unreadable. They stood toe-to-toe for a heartbeat. Then Marvin furrowed his brow, looked away, and whispered to the director, "I can't do this." Bronson, caught off guard, nodded once and simply said, "Understood." The cameras never rolled. The project was shelved, and the world never saw that final attempt at reunification. When Lee Marvin passed away in 1987 and Charles Bronson in 2003, their obituaries both noted the Dirty Dozen feud as an indelible chapter. Hundreds of articles recounted their clash, often ending with a lament that two icons had died without healing their breach. Yet in the whisper of hindsight, critics conceded that their story transcended personal pride. It captured the complexities of human nature. We celebrate heroes for their valor, but we also must acknowledge their imperfections. Marvin and Bronson reminded us that even legendary brothers-in-arms can become strangers when pride intervenes. Today, film buffs continue to debate whether the Dirty Dozen sequel might have rekindled their partnership or whether pride would have doomed it again. The split frames of promotional stills hang in archives, two halves of a once-shared promise never fulfilled. And as streaming platforms revive vintage films for a new audience, viewers discover the Dirty Dozen for the first time, unaware of the off-screen drama that permeates every shared shot. Perhaps the greatest legacy of Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson lies not in the war they fought on camera, but in the human struggle they endured off it. A testament to the truth that no matter how fierce the battle, some wounds run deeper than any battlefield, and some bridges, once broken, can never be rebuilt. Despite their lifelong feud, the legacies of Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson continue to reverberate through modern cinema, proving that two actors who could not reconcile their personal differences nonetheless shaped an entire genre. Today's action heroes, from terse lone wolves to grizzled mentors, trace their DNA back to Marvin's withering bark and Bronson's silent glare. Streaming platforms display their work side by side, while social media algorithms recommend one whenever viewers queue up the other. In fan forums, posts titled "Marvin vs. Bronson: The Unequal Rivalry" draw hundreds of comments debating which actor better embodied post-war masculinity. Each new generation rediscovers their films, sometimes unaware of the off-screen drama that still colors every shared scene at AT conventions and film festivals. Panels explore the feud not as mere gossip, but as a cultural case study. Scholars in film schools assign essays on how professional pride can derail collaborations, using Marvin and Bronson as textbook examples. Workshops on conflict resolution in creative industries cite their story to illustrate the high cost of unresolved tension. Meanwhile, documentaries like Brothers at War and Bridges Never Rebuilt interview surviving crew members, co-stars, and family to assemble a fuller picture of men who lived in public view yet could not bridge a private rift. These projects underscore an ironic truth. Even as filmmakers strive for narrative coherence on camera, the human element remains unpredictable. For cinephiles, the feud has become part of the viewing experience. Some fans parody the tension by editing alternate takes, imagining reconciliations, placing Marvin and Bronson in humorous peacemaking scenes set to comic music. Others produce side-by-side mashups that highlight their contrasting acting styles. Marvin's coarse baritone opposing Bronson's laconic restraint. YouTube channels dissect individual scenes for clues. Did Marvin intentionally lean into Bronson's eyeline? Did Bronson's silence signal contempt or focus performance? Every gesture and pause invites overheated analysis, as if the ghosts of Federal Hill and the dusty Spanish fortress still whisper between frames. Film critics have revisited the Dirty Dozen in the context of the feud, occasionally recutting the climactic bridge sequence to emphasize the actors' strained proximity. They argue that art imitates life too perfectly. The squad's fracture at the finale stands as an unwitting metaphor for its leader's own breakup. Younger editors splice in modern reaction shots, news clips of the private files scandal, memorial footage from Caprio's funeral, Bronson's solitary carpentry projects, to craft a broader narrative arc of compassion corrupted by pride. Through these retellings, Marvin and Bronson achieve an accidental duet, their stories harmonizing across decades of public fascination. Outside academic and fan circles, the feud has influenced narrative tropes in contemporary television and film. Shows about toxic partnerships and broken brotherhood often echo the archetype of two strong-willed individuals whose inability to yield drives conflict. Writers craft characters who must learn humility or face professional exile, mirroring the real-world consequence that confronted Marvin and Bronson. Some even name-drop the Dirty Dozen incident within dialogue as an in-world cautionary example. Casting directors jokingly warn actors, "Don't become the next Marvin and Bronson," when interviews turn heated. Despite the conflict's persistence, undercurrents of mutual respect surfaced in surprising places. In a 2010 audio recording discovered in Bronson's estate sale, he praised Marvin's commanding presence and acknowledged that no one paired toughness with vulnerability as effectively. Similarly, Marvin's surviving journals contain passages reminiscing about Bronson's steady professionalism and hinting at regret for words left unsaid. These artifacts reveal two men haunted by their own standards. Marvin prided himself on candor to the point of harshness, Bronson on silent integrity to the point of isolation. Their unspoken admiration endured beneath the surface, lost in translation by ears tuned only for conflict. In pop culture, merchandise continues to evoke both stars together despite their estrangement. Posters show them standing side by side in dusty uniforms, rifles shouldered, with taglines reading, "Brothers in Arms until the gun smoke clears." T-shirts, enamel pins, even coffee mugs bear these images, transforming amnesia into homage. Fans buy these items as ironic statements of loyalty to a legend of cinematic brotherhood that never quite existed. At film markets, production companies tout remastered Blu-ray box sets that showcase both actors, marketing them as a pair despite historical friction. Revenue from these releases underscores a paradox. While Marvin and Bronson refuse to reconcile, their combined brand remains irresistible. Curators at the Academy Museum in Los Angeles have proposed a permanent exhibit titled Fractured Brotherhood, Marvin and Bronson, featuring costumes, letters, and set blueprints. The exhibit aims to challenge visitors to consider how personal pride can shape public legacies. Interactive kiosks let attendees explore reimagined outcomes. What if Bronson had accepted the 1975 reunion script? What if Marvin had tempered his temper with an apology? Through these thought experiments, the museum spotlights the fragility of artistic alliances and the human cost of unyielding ego. Today, as new directors repurpose vintage war narratives and mentor dynamics, they pay homage to Marvin's rough-edged wit and Bronson's stoic reserve. Yet they also carry lessons from a fateful bridge in Spain. Talent alone cannot cement a partnership. The human heart demands humility too. The ongoing fascination with their feud reminds us that behind every iconic performance lies a complex individual, capable of both greatness and stubborn fault. In honoring their cinematic achievements, we also reckon with a story that transcends reels and cameras. It is the story of two men who fought real battles and fictional ones, and whose final stand was not in front of an audience, but within themselves. When we look back at that dusty Spanish set where two giants stood toe-to-toe, the meaning of the Marvin Bronson rift extends far beyond Hollywood gossip. Their impasse reminds us that even the greatest stars, forged by war and ambition, can fracture partnerships when pride overshadows empathy. Both Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson carried scars unseen by cameras, scars only a battlefield could inflict. Yet on that fateful bridge, mutual respect gave way to wounded egos. Each man believed in his own code of honor, blind to the possibility that true strength sometimes demands forgiveness more than dominance. In the decades that followed, neither man ever fully escaped the shadow of their feud. Audiences continued to celebrate Marvin's gravelly wit and Bronson's silent menace, but behind the scenes a profound question lingered. How much good art, camaraderie, or even personal healing was lost to a single moment of unrestrained pride? The answer emerges in every what if whispered among film buffs, in every script where rival heroes mend fences, and in every class where aspiring actors learn that humility fuels collaboration. Today, when directors cast ensemble pieces, they often cite Marvin and Bronson as cautionary examples of unresolved fallout. Producers negotiate clear communication and empathy workshops. Actors share conflict resolution strategies learned from beans and stunt rifles. Their story, immortalized in memoirs and docudramas, demonstrates that no level of talent or battlefield valor immunizes one against the corrosive power of stubbornness. It is a lesson as relevant for indie filmmakers as it is for studio executives. In fan conventions around the world, cosplayers don vintage uniforms and recreate scenes from The Dirty Dozen, complete with playful nods to the notorious Fallout. Panels titled Broken Brothers draw packed audiences, where historians and psychologists dissect the feud's origins and aftermath. Viewers laugh at reenactments of quips never uttered on camera, even as they wince at the real pain behind each ridicule shot and each unsent apology letter. In this way, the feud transcends mere celebrity gossip. It becomes a living classroom. Streaming services now recommend Marvin's and Bronson's films in tandem, algorithmically linking the two as a package deal. Viewers encountering The Dirty Dozen for the first time may never learn of the off-screen animosity, yet they feel it in every crosscut and shared frame. In a strange twist, the feud itself has become part of the viewing experience, an invisible current that charges each exchange and fuels renewed curiosity. For some, it enhances the drama. For others, it casts a melancholy pall. Cinephiles continue to debate which actor might have softened first if only one had yielded an ounce of regret. Would Marvin's bracing candor or Bronson's stoic reserve have cracked under the weight of accountability? The question remains unanswered because neither man ever conceded to cross that final threshold. Their refusal to reconcile echoes in each new film about fractured trust, turning a single production mishap into a universal metaphor for broken bonds. In classrooms across the country, film students examine Clint Eastwood's A Fistful of Dollars and Robert Redford's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid through the lens of the Marvin Bronson saga. They compare how on-screen duos harness tension for narrative momentum without allowing it to consume the story behind the scenes. These analyses underscore the importance of differentiating between character conflict crafted for drama and real-life clashes that can derail entire careers and friendships. Meanwhile, collectors pay tribute with limited edition memorabilia. Dual portraits of Marvin and Bronson, set jaws and all, printed on metal plaques that hang in studio offices around the globe. Beneath each image, a simple plaque reads, "Forged by battle, divided by pride." These artifacts serve as daily reminders that glory and humility must coexist, that even icons can fall victim to a moment's lapse in emotional intelligence. Documentaries revisiting The Dirty Dozen often feature voice recordings unearthed from private archives, snippets of Marvin practicing his lines, Bronson scribbling in notebooks, both rehearsing scenes that would never capture the bitterness simmering beneath. These behind-the-scenes glimpses reveal two men who understood the craft and the gravity of their roles, yet struggled to master the art of vulnerability off-camera. It's a potent illustration that skill alone cannot bridge personal chasms.